There's a storm brewing across the mid-Atlantic. A storm so powerful, a storm so strong, that they've canceled Halloween in most of the region. I've just stepped outside and the first raindrops have just started falling. Even the clouds are racing across the sky, running in fear as if they themselves are seeking shelter from their own storm. The wind whips up, telling the clouds, it's not you we fear, it's not us, it's not this storm. The true fear is that tonight is the night that he, she, it, or they comes home. No doubt, at some time, everyone watching this has had a dream so vivid, so real, that when you awaken, you fear you're still in it. This is not an uncommon occurrence. What is uncommon, however, is when you have such a dream multiple nights in a row. Such was the case for myself this week when I had a recurring dream about an old friend and a Halloween from 35 years ago. The only other Halloween in my life that I can remember being canceled. And it was not due to a coming storm, such as the excuse being given throughout much of the mid-Atlantic tonight. I had an old childhood friend. We'll call him Robbie. I haven't seen Robbie in 30 years. Robbie lived out of town about a mile and a half, straight up a holler in the middle of the woods. His house was the only one in his area. There was nothing between the city limits and his house but forest. Dark, creepy, unlit forest. We feared not that forest. We were kids, we were brave, we were outdoorsmen. We really believed that there was nothing out there at night that wasn't out there during the day. Yeah, one particular Halloween night when Robbie was supposed to come down to my house so that we could go trick-or-treating together, along with a couple of our other friends, Robbie said he would come down, but only if one of our parents would give him a ride back up to his house after we were finished trick-or-treating, when it was dark. Well, why is that, Robbie? Halloween's got you scared, we asked. We've walked up that hill many times in the dark, and we know you've done it many times yourself. Robbie was an athlete. He played sports many times. After basketball practice, for instance, in the winter, he trekked up that hill in the pitch of dark without a care in the world. But that Halloween night, he refused. Sure, Robbie, one of the guys said. I'll have my mom take you home. So Robbie came home with me that day after school. No need to go all the way to the top of that mountain, only to come back an hour or so later to go trick-or-treating. We had dinner at my house. Some of the other guys came over. And just as we were about to go trick-or-treating, they canceled Halloween. They said someone had escaped from an institution and they were going to try to get out of town under the disguise of a Halloween costume and mask that night. So it ruined it for us. We couldn't go trick-or-treating. And we got this news at the last minute. So There was just enough daylight left for me and a couple of guys to walk Robbie home before it got dark. Boy, all the guys were so brave until we got to the edge of the woods, to the mouth of the hollow that led up to Robbie's house, where we would see the last street light we would see. All of a sudden, everybody except myself and Robbie had a reason as to why they had to go home early. We had about 20 minutes of daylight left, and it was nearly a 20 to 30 minute walk. Just enough time, which would mean I would be coming home alone in the dark. One of the craziest things you can do is go halfway to the halfway point of any adventure and decide it's too far to continue and turn around and go back. The craziest thing we did that night was go 3/4 of the way to Robbie's house, realize dark was coming, and I would be left to walk home alone in the dark. So then we turned around and went back. We got ourselves in quite a pickle, as once we were about a quarter of a mile out of the woods heading back down the hill, it was so dark we couldn't see. But we could hear, and here we did. We heard footsteps running quickly through the forest, cracking sticks and limbs and breaking leaves coming to the road right towards us. At first, the footsteps were from our right, and then they were from our left. We knew not which way to run, but we figured we could go downhill faster than we could up, so down towards the city we took off for all we were worth. Just as we rounded the last bend to make our way into town, we saw flashing red and blue lights and bright headlights shining our way. And in front of the car, running straight towards us, was someone we believed in a costume, dressed like an ape, or some other large bipedal creature, running straight into the forest. It ran right between us, hitting both of us with its elbows. We were not quite fully grown at the time, but we were probably 5.5 feet tall, 5'8". We were 14, 15 years old. And this thing hit us in the ears with its elbows, and it stunk like a skunk. It knocked us both to the ground, though I don't believe it intended to do so. Yes, I'm using the term "it" now. And the reason why is because as we were rising, the officers had stopped their cars. They had drawn their weapons. They were ready to fire, but they didn't, because they saw us in between themselves and their target. Terrified, we did what we knew to do based upon watching movies of similar situations. We raised our hands, we yelled, "Don't shoot." They didn't. And as we stood there catching our own breath, we couldn't help but hear the heavy, labored breathing behind us. Robbie and I both turned, and there, just within the wood line, still flooded by the spotlights from the police cars, stood something between 7 and 8 feet tall that reached to high heaven, that gave us a look of thanks. It turned, slipped into the woods, and was gone. Robbie stayed with me that night. he went home the next day. Everyone thought the fugitive had gotten away because we got in the way. But later that next day, we found out he had been caught in the next town over. He had been dressed up for Halloween, but he wasn't dressed up as an ape or as any other large bipedal creature. He had dressed up like a clown. I asked Robbie later why. Of all the times he's walked home in the dark, and I'd gone with him and sometimes he'd gone alone, why on Halloween night? Why on Halloween night did you not feel safe in your own woods? I now know the answer to my own question I asked those years ago. So do you.